1973, and Braniff International introduces the first flying work of art, the unique 6,000-mile range, 600-mile-an-hour exclusive DC-862, painted by Alexander Calder, an original called Flying Colors. Braniff International, later that same year, focused its attention on a sport which has captured the imagination and following of young people throughout the Western Hemisphere, motocross. And we went to Saddleback Park, the cradle of motocross in the United States in Southern California. And here to comment on the race you're about to see is Gary Bailey, Mr. Motocross himself. Gary?
Motocross originated in Europe in about the early 40s and the late 50s and was brought to the United States in the late 60s and 70s. Here we'll see some of the riders in competition today, some of the best riders in the world, and the best riders in the United States. Many of these machines that we will be seeing, here we have the start of the first race of the 250 support class. Many of the riders in this class, however, even though it may be called a support class, many of these riders are as good of riders as the riders that will be competing in the international competition. We'll be looking at many different styles of riding of the riders out here today. The riders now proceeding off the starting line, coming down in through the down the downhill and in through the first corner. The first rider here, number 24, is Rich Eierstedt, leading the pack down the hill. The downhill sections should be equally as fast as the uphill section. For those of you that don't understand motocross riding is laid out on a hillside over natural terrain with many jumps. It's very hard on the motorcycle, very hard on the suspension. And the technique which is involved is very critical. The riders now, as we watch them coming out of the corners, using a lot of body weight transfer coming out of the corners, proper power, and so on to be able to get the motorcycle to get around the racetrack quickly. Down the downhill section, these riders are probably traveling somewhere between 70 and 75 mile an hour, which doesn't seem very fast to people that aren't associated much with motocross, but it would probably be equivalent to running about 120 mile an hour over the down a flat road. The jumping techniques which are involved, you'll see the riders coming over the jumps, keeping the motorcycle very low to the ground. There are many different techniques of jumping a motorcycle. However, the proper way is to get the motorcycle pushed out, get the motorcycle, keep it low to the ground, and get it moving forward quickly. The riders here in this particular race here, now we have the checkered flag, which is something that many of the riders are very glad to see, particularly after running a 20 or 30-minute moto. Here in the pit area, we have riders getting ready for the next moto. This being the start of the first race of the 500cc. This race will be running for 40 minutes plus 2 laps. This is 40 minutes over the roughest possible terrain that you can imagine. Motocross riding is supposed to be the #2 sport. It is the #2 sport. Physically demanding next to soccer. Soccer is the #1 sport. The ground in which these riders travel over is tremendous. It's unbelievably rough, and it's quite unbelievable. You've never seen a motocross race. This is an unbelievable thing. And riding it, there's no way to explain the things that you go through and how fast you have to be going. Again, we can watch some of the cornering techniques. You'll see cornering techniques now of some of the world champions and how they go around the corner in comparison to some of the others. We'll try and point out a few of the riders here in this race right at this particular time. This is the first 40-minute moto, and we have Roger DeCoster, 3-time world champion, leading Adolf Weil of the Mako factory from West Germany. Here we have a picture of Timmy Hart on the Yamaha factory mono shop. Notice the jumping techniques as the riders go over. The moment that the motorcycle touches the ground, they're under full power and charging the motorcycle forward all the time. Brad Lackey, their #1 on the Kawasaki, was the top American rider for this race. Here we have a rider landing, getting a little bit sideways, almost unloading. The importance of having the power back on the motorcycle very quickly and getting it down to the ground and getting it moving. The impact is severe. You can break a motorcycle in 2 over these jumps if the suspension is not set up properly. Here Roger DeCoster making a very good job of cornering. Notice the weight transfer and the technique of cornering, which is very important. You have to be able to get the motorcycle around the corner quickly in the shortest possible line without killing your speed at all going around the corner. Riders of this caliber don't hesitate to pass other riders. They come up on them very quickly, and they pass them equally as fast. This is the difference many times that you'll find between the professional rider and the amateur rider whenever they're going around. Let's just take just a minute and watch some of these riders as they go around through the corners. You may notice as many of these riders go through, and particularly through the rough sections, it appears many times as though they're sitting on the seat. These riders are not actually sitting on the seat. They're very close to it, and many times they are just barely touching the seat. You can't sit directly on the motorcycle, because if you do, the motorcycle will have a tendency to throw you around. The main idea is to keep the body under control, even though the motorcycle does jump around a lot. And now the checker flag, once again, a good sight to a motocross rider, particularly on a hot day. Getting ready for the second and final moto of the 500cc class, and around the corner and down the first hill. And it looks like in the lead we have Roger DeCoster and Adolph Wheel running 1-2 again. Again, DeCoster in the front and Adolph Wheel in the second. And followed many of the other riders following. A couple of the American riders running up there very closely. Unfortunately, the European riders are a bit faster than the American riders. It comes with a great deal of more of experience, and also the fact that they have been getting sponsorship a great deal longer than the American riders. And many of the American riders have been doing it as a pastime for several years, and now in the last couple of years, the riders are getting paid money as good money where they can make it a job instead of just a pastime. Here we have a chance to watch some of the riders going over the jump from the rear angle. You can see many different techniques of body weight transfer and so on as the riders go down through here. Now we have Adolph Wheel leading the race with Roger DeCoster in second going into the final moto. These two riders are probably two of the best riders in the world, running here very closely. They run like this for the whole moto for 40 minutes, which is quite unbelievable. These two riders will run like this, never more than 10 or 15 bike lengths apart for the whole time. At this particular point, Roger DeCoster running very close behind Adolph Wheel and hoping that just waiting for Adolph Wheel to make a mistake. The horsepower of these machines is unbelievable. The things that these motorcycles can do, the things that these riders can actually spend this much time. Here you notice a rider throwing a face shield off. Many of the riders will wear one or two face shields, particularly if it happens to be particularly muddy out on the racetrack, and they'll carry these face shields with them and they'll throw them off so that they can have clear vision for the rest of the race. Still, we have a very close race going between first and second place, Roger DeCoster and Adolph Wheel. Still going into this moto, after about 20 minutes, they're still running just as close as they were before. The fans on the hill, we're running approximately about 35,000 spectators. This will vary in different parts of the country and in Europe. And in Europe, where it's a national sport, in some of the countries, they've got 250,000 people for these motocross races. Quite a crowd. Goal, Roger DeCoster comes through that rough section there, the back end kicking up. He didn't get the front end up high enough, allowing the back suspension to work too much, kicking the motorcycle up in the air. These riders have to use unbelievable concentration for the whole moto. There's absolutely no time to relax. If these riders take 1 second to relax and they hit any of these rocks or these bad spots on the racetrack, they throw them off the motorcycle very quickly. And now the end of the second moto, and Roger DeCoster comes in second, Adolph Wheel first, which gives Adolph Wheel the win for the day for overall. Roger DeCoster takes some time to sign some autographs for some of the people. Here we have an unfortunate thing that happens in motocross and in all types of racing.
The following weekend, Braniff's Flying Colors took off for South America on one of its regularly scheduled flights, non-stop to Lima, Peru, where we focused our attention on the finals of the Peruvian Nationals on December 10 at Manchay, a fine motocross track just about 25 minutes outside of Lima. And here's Gary again to talk about the Peruvian motocross. This team, incidentally, went to a Gary Bailey motocross school shortly after this particular event.
If you'll notice these riders, particularly coming through the first corner, you'll notice a slight difference in riding technique from these riders and the riders in which you just watched at Saddleback Park in California. These riders are much more inexperienced, more of the amateur type riders. We can watch some of these riders and we can learn a great deal from watching these amateur riders as well as from watching the expert riders. In fact, many times you can learn a lot more watching the novice rider if you pay attention and know what you're looking for, because you can watch the things that they do, the mistakes they do, and you can kind of look at them and say, gee, that's one of the things I don't want to do whenever I get on a motorcycle. Sometimes your professional riders will make it look so easy that you don't really realize the things that they're doing. You'll notice that in many of the shots here that the riders spend a lot of time going too high over the jumps, and there's a nice thing to have in the race. So always after the race is over, there's nothing like a good kiss. Riders getting ready now for the second moto. And they come around the corner again, and once again the rider's getting a little bit out of shape. Everyone trying to go too fast, drifting a little bit wide in the corner rather than keeping it in very tight, such as many of the professional riders do. The track, as we have in many places, we have all different types of terrain, and this is what makes a good professional motocross rider. You have to be able to ride in all types of situations. In Saddleback, we had a very good track there, which was a little bit tacky. Here we have a little bit more of a dry shale type situation. And oh yes, and the food and the drinks, that's all a part of anything. The rider's getting ready now for the third and the final moto of the day. Motos are run, by the way, in 3 particular races, which the riders score points. You get 1 point for a first, 2 points for a second, 3 for a third, and so on down the line. The rider at the end of the day, having the least amount of points, will come out in front. And one thing you don't want to do when you're leading, you don't want to stall your engine in the first corner. Here we were very fortunate, and there was not a bad crash going in. However, sometimes it does happen. It always amazes me how that many times in the races, and as many starts as they have with sometimes 35 or 40 riders going in the first corner, that there aren't more crashes than they are. We can notice that these riders come around the corner. These riders have a tendency to drift out extremely wide whenever they come around, not like the professional riders we saw at Saddleback, whereas they made the corners, they kept them in very tight, got the motorcycle straight upright and back on the throttle as soon as possible. This is something that's very important. We don't want to spend any more time than we have to swinging wide in the corners. We want to get around the corner as quickly as possible, get it straight upright, and get full on the throttle. Surprisingly enough, many of the riders from Lima, Peru area, where I was fortunate to go down and have a school, there are some very good riders down there, although they've only been doing it for about 3 or 4 years. There are some excellent riders down there, and they do a fine job and put out a very fine effort. Things are a little bit more expensive down there. And again, the crowds on the hillside, as in all the other countries around, they draw very good crowds. The scorers probably the hardest job of all, and nobody ever thinks much about them but the scorers. They spend all day out there, and most of them do it just for the love of the sport. Again, the finished checker flag, something that all the riders look for, particularly on one of these dry, dusty tracks.
Later in February of the following year, we took flying colors to Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, jumping off point for a trip to the fabulous lake region of southern Argentina, the capital of that area called Bariloche. We flew Austral, a local service carrier from Buenos Aires, 1.5 hours down to Bariloche, one of the most beautiful spots in the world. This is a annual event, and Argentina, Chile, Peru, and Uruguay compete in a 3-day motocross. Gary?
This motocross, as all the other motocrosses around the country, you'll see people sitting around waiting for the races to happen, riders getting their motorcycles prepared, getting all their proper racing gear, their helmets and boots and leathers and so on. You'll see many of the motorcycles, some as you would see in the other countries around, and probably some of the motorcycles that you wouldn't see in other countries. Here it's very hard to obtain a motocross. It's hard to get the motocross machines down there, such as all the trick Yamahas and Makos and many of those. So it's very difficult for them to get these. Here the riders having a rider introduction of all the riders getting ready for the race, the flag ceremonies and so on. Riders bringing their motorcycles to the starting line, getting ready for this big 3-day event. This is 3 days of motocross racing. The start of the first moto going in. We must watch very closely. Claudio Pesce gets a pretty good start there. Claudio is the winner of this 3-day event here in Argentina. Got a very good lead here. Riders crashing coming down the hill, which is something that does happen in motocross. The dust situation that we have is something that we have to contend with sometimes in motocross. The riders don't like it much, and it's a little bit harder for the spectators, but this is what makes this sport so tough and hard on the riders. Here Claudio makes a very good drive to pass other riders. He doesn't hesitate. When he moves up behind him, he passes them quickly, and this is what is involved in winning motocross. The start is very important in motocross. You have to get a good start. Probably not nearly as important as other forms of motorcycle racing where so much of horsepower is involved, but it's involved where the rider and the motorcycle is probably 50-50 in this motocross type racing. Getting ready now, I believe, for the second race of the day. Here the riders come in, and 2 riders go down in the first corner. The riders are laying there, and here we go. Oh, somebody's going to be upset now. I can see it. I think these 2 riders are going to have a few words. I don't know. Let's wait just a minute. And here, I think we have our Joe Frazier and our Muhammad Ali. They're a beautiful job of cornering, by Claudio. One of the riders has gone down and bent his machine up a little bit. This is unbelievable. You almost have to ride this to believe just exactly how rough it is. The tremendous beating that the riders and the machine takes, and after 30 or 40 minutes of this type of racing, believe me, there's nothing like a good cold drink. Getting ready now for the start of the 3rd and the final moto here. Riders taping up their hands to keep from getting blisters on them, which is very easy to do. And now they start into the 3rd moto. And we'll take a few minutes here and watch the final part of this moto.
On behalf of Braniff International, I want to thank Gary Bailey for being with us today. Gary is the first American to compete in the Europeans at motocross in this country in 1969. Since 1970, he has been on the road teaching motocross to literally thousands of American youngsters throughout the United States. Almost any weekend, you find Gary Bailey Motocross School at a motocross park somewhere in the United States. And in 1974, he took motocross school to Lima, Peru, where he taught some of these youngsters that you see riding in this particular race. Braniff International thinks that motocross, just like other energetic, competitive sports, is a great thing and a great way for the youngsters of the Americas to get to know each other and to create better understanding. Braniff International flies to 10 South American countries and Mexico, and is delighted to be a part and play a small part in developing motocross on a worldwide basis. Thank you very much.